NATO prepares for a conflict with China. Beijing has an idiotic plan to fight inflation, and the Communist Party has a new baby-making policy. Then more on this week's China News headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, especially to look into controversial topics like government cover-ups, you should be using a VPN like Surfshark to protect your identity. The U.S. was big mad about that Chinese spy balloon earlier this month. So much so that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken postponed his trip to Beijing in retaliation, which had to have felt good for Blinken. There's nothing better than finding an excuse to cancel plans. But that hasn't actually stopped Blinken from meeting with Chinese officials. He met with Foreign Minister Wang Yi last Saturday on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. How'd that meeting go? Well, according to the U.S. side, Blinken told Wang that the spy balloon was an unacceptable violation of U.S. sovereignty. But according to the Chinese side, the U.S. shooting down the balloon was an abuse of the use of force in violation of customary international practice. In other words, the U.S. and China are definitely not seeing eye to eye. Speaking of not seeing eye to eye, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. After that conference in Munich, Wang Yi went to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin. I don't know what they said in private, but in public, Putin said that Russian-Chinese relations were proceeding as planned. And Wang Yi said, a crisis is always an opportunity. Based on that, I assume in private they talked about how their favorite Game of Thrones character was Littlefinger. And the line is, chaos is a ladder, not crisis is an opportunity, you noob. What are Sino-Russian relations like now, a year after the Ukraine invasion, especially in the context of China and Russia, continuing to be BFFs? Oh, look, they even made each other friendship bracelets. That'd be adorable if they weren't monsters. Well, the U.S. is warning China not to send weapons to Russia for the Ukraine war. For context, the U.S. is sending weapons to Ukraine for its defense. President Biden went to Kiev to meet with the Ukrainian president this week. However, China claims to be neutral in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is why the financial sanctions the U.S. applies to Russia are not also being applied to China. But if China were actually sending weapons to Russia, that would clearly be taking sides. And that would mean the U.S.'s relationship with China would have to change too, like by expanding the Russia sanctions to China. According to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, U.S. intelligence suggests that China is considering providing arms and ammunition to Russia. Doesn't mean that's happening, though. It's just a maybe they're considering it. Well, no duh, they're considering it. That's the level of intelligence the U.S. collected. Get off the couch and do some real digging, Blinken. And the U.S. population might be a bit reluctant to take what U.S. intelligence says at its word, given how they were burned with that whole Iraq WMDs thing 20 years ago. The North Americas, remember. Meanwhile, NATO is already gearing up for a possible conflict with China. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said this week, what is happening in Europe today could happen in Asia tomorrow, by which he means China might try to invade Taiwan tomorrow. Figuratively. I have to clarify because the people of Taiwan are justifiably on edge right now because China might try to actually invade Taiwan tomorrow. Speaking at that same Munich Security Conference, Stoltenberg said, the war in Ukraine has made clear the danger of over-reliance on authoritarian regimes. We should not make the same mistake with China and other authoritarian regimes. He told his audience that it's maybe not so good for the West to be relying on Chinese goods or exporting key technologies to China. I'm really glad he said that. The same thing I've been saying for 10 years. This feels like when a friend tells you that The Wire is great. Of course it is. I've been trying to get you into the show for a decade now. Better late than never, I guess. And after the break, China's response to COVID has created a miracle in human history. Welcome back. Remember when China solved COVID? Wait, you don't? Because Chinese Communist Party leaders sure do. Last week, they announced that China has achieved a major, decisive victory in its COVID response. Basically, the Chinese Communist Party is saying they were right to lock down major cities in the beginning. Then they were right to open them up, showing how much better they were at pandemic response than the rest of the world. Then they were right again when they implemented their harsh zero COVID policy and set up all those quarantine camps. And finally, they were right to suddenly end zero COVID at the end of last year, after cases started exploding across the country and they realized they couldn't stop COVID. In other words, the Communist Party's response to COVID has created a miracle in human history because they've successfully pulled through a pandemic with hardly anyone dying, at least hardly anyone officially dying. But congratulations are in order. China did manage to perform one miracle. They miraculously announced a mission accomplished more embarrassing than this one. But while China calls its COVID response a miracle in human history, the data isn't so clear because they've intentionally stopped counting COVID cases. Chinese health authorities stopped releasing figures for so-called asymptomatic cases nationwide late last year, as they dismantled the country's extensive COVID-19 mass testing apparatus and allowed people to test and recover at home. And if there's no data, then no one got sick or died, right? The same way no one died in Tiananmen Square. And no one ever questions that. Mission accomplished. But one thing the Communist Party can't hide is how badly their economy is crashing. The property sector, for example, is doing so badly that, as Caixin magazine put it, it's just barrels of red ink, which sounds like the aftermath of Judge Doom melting Clifford the Big Red Dog. Not what you want to hear from a financial forecast. Property sales dropped more than 28% last year, and only 5% of property businesses turned profits, which sounds like a great time to invest in China. Sadly, I'm not joking, because China is now trying to encourage foreign investment in its real estate sector through private equity funds. And, of course, they're going to bite. Because no matter how hard or for how long I've been trying to tell everyone, some folks just won't watch The Wire. The way private equity funds work is they use piles of cash to buy up dying companies at low prices. Then they restructure them and hopefully fix the companies so they can be profitable again. Which is why China has officially given the green light for the establishment of property-focused private equity funds. In other words, the Communist Party wants Western companies to dump piles of cash to fix the real estate problem the Communist Party created. If it works, China gets bailed out with foreign money. If it fails, China still gets to keep the cash. So if you've got millions of dollars lying around and you're stupid, this is a great opportunity. An even better opportunity is giving that money to me in exchange for some swampland in Narnia. That investment is just as likely to work out for you. Speaking of money, China is seeing high levels of inflation, especially in Beijing, where food prices rose 6.6% over the past year. Well, the Beijing municipal government has a solution. They're going to give the poorest residents of the city $6 a month to fight inflation. That's 40 yuan. And the public says it's not enough. But I say don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Even if that gift horse shut down your factory or took away your business during COVID, take your $6 a month and shut up. It's enough to buy an entire bowl of noodles for the 2% of Beijing residents who qualify for the program. Waiting for your grandmother to send you a $5 check for your birthday is a more feasible financial plan. At least it would be if China's COVID policies hadn't killed all the grandmas. And after the break, China's Navy is building way more ships than the U.S. Welcome back. The Pentagon's top China official, Michael Chase, has paid a rare visit to Taiwan this week. He's one of only 2 top Pentagon officials who visited Taiwan in 4 decades. The other visit was in 2019 during the Trump administration. The point of the trip, obviously, was to anger China, and I assume to eat some of the delicious Tainan beef hot pot. The Pentagon declined to comment on Chase's trip, but they stressed that U.S. support for Taiwan remains aligned against the current threat posed by the People's Republic of China. So the U.S. isn't officially changing its China policy, like by recognizing Taiwan as a country, or by setting up a military base there, or by officially promising to come to Taiwan's aid if China attacks. But at least this visit is something. Grow a spine, America. Go all in on your support. Seriously, isn't this worth going to war over? Hopefully there is no war with China, though, because the U.S. can't keep up with China's warship building. That's according to Secretary of the Navy Carlos del Toro. He said China has a larger fleet than the U.S., and they're deploying that fleet globally. The U.S. Navy fleet is just under 300 ships, whereas China's is already at 340. And China is building new ships a lot faster than the U.S. is. Of course, U.S. troops have better training with a lot more veterans, but that could eventually change too, which I guess means that if China is going to attack Taiwan, better sooner than later when they have even more ships, right? They could attack tomorrow, figuratively. According to Australia's former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, China is carrying out blatant influence operations there. Australia does have a law for this that Parliament passed in 2018. It's called the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme, or FITS for short. Yes, even Australian lawmakers come up with dumb acronyms for their bills. The only difference between American and Australian politicians is that when Australians flush money down the toilet, it spins counterclockwise. In theory, FITS requires people to register any activities they do on behalf of a foreign group, or to influence political or government affairs. But in practice, it fails to capture the subtle things the CCP is really good at, the kind of influence operations that don't fall under FITS reporting requirements. Turnbull complained that according to the Transparency Register, there is apparently no organization in Australia that has any association with the United Front Work Department of the Communist Party of China. In other words, the CCP has figured out how to get around FITS. For example, they influence people through people and groups that don't officially have a China connection, so that doesn't get put in the system. A senior fellow at ANU described it like this. The way FITS is at the moment, it might be capturing a former minister on a BBC cooking show, but not capturing former politicians with dealings with a company like Huawei. So, props to Australia on the foreign interference law, not so much for the implementation. This is like trying to get in shape by joining Planet Fitness, but only going on free pizza days. Might need to change your plans to meet your goals. And over in Canada, the military has tracked Chinese surveillance in the Arctic. Because if anyone's equipped to handle the Arctic, it's Canada. I honestly can't tell if that's a South Pole or Saskatchewan. Apparently, China had installed a bunch of buoys to track activity in the region. But the Canadian government isn't keen to give out more information on what they found, except to say that they've stopped many of them. And China is not an Arctic nation, but it does put a lot of resources into the Arctic Circle, including using it for shipping and for conducting what it calls scientific research. But experts say that China's research interests in the region have also doubled as attempts to surveil military assets in the Arctic. And no one is surprised. Not even the polar bears. Even they saw that one coming. China has a demographic crisis. Not enough children are being born. That's thanks in part to a poorly thought out one-child policy that led to more than 300 million abortions. It turns out, lifting the one-child policy 8 years ago was not enough to turn things around. So now they're trying to get people to have more children with the new policy. That is, some Chinese provinces are giving couples as much as 30 days of paid marriage leave to start making babies, which goes to show the Communist Party won't even leave you alone on your honeymoon. And considering how much they spy on their own citizens, I wouldn't be surprised if they make the pregnancy announcement for you. Hey look, another miracle. And this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. When you go online, everything you do is being tracked and logged by the websites you visit and your internet service provider, and in many cases, by your government. That's why no matter where you live or what you do online, you should always be keeping your internet activity private with a VPN. And now, Surfshark has servers you can connect to in over 100 countries. That's more than any other VPN. So that makes your connection faster and more reliable. Plus, Surfshark has top-of-the-line encryption and a no-logs policy, meaning they don't collect your browsing data. In fact, Surfshark was rated Editor's Choice for the best VPN for privacy and security by PCMag. So check out Surfshark. With just one Surfshark account, you can connect as many devices as you want. Try it out now. Surfshark has a special deal that includes 83% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months for free. You can protect yourself for just $2.21 a month. So go to surfshark.com/uncensored and use the code uncensored to secure this deal. The link is in the description below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.